Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Meredith Gershenson. I'm a research analyst here at workforce.com. And today, as the title suggests, we're going to be talking about a very important topic on how to increase manager engagement and retention. Today, I am joined by the one and only Jon Woodworth, aka Woody. Jon, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, Meredith. I'm looking forward to talking about this topic.
Definitely a lot to unpack here, that's for sure. To give a little background on Jon, Jon is the owner of Due Diligence, LLC, and operations consultant. Jon, aka Woody, has a unique background offering expertise in many areas. For 18 years, Woody has led at General Mills manufacturing facilities and delivered financial, service, and production results with a focus towards employee, consumer, and environmental responsibility and safety. Over the last 4 years as SVP of Operations at Kite Hill, he transformed the manufacturing operations, resulting in a 30-point margin improvement. Woody started his career as a cost accountant, which led him to an opportunity in HR management, again in manufacturing. This began his love for operations and being able to see an immediate result from individual and team coaching. So you have the best of both worlds, which is amazing. I know a lot of our audience is both in that HR operations, general management space. So I think having you as our guest is going to be amazing.
Thanks. Hopefully I'll be able to offer kind of a unique perspective, having played in both ops and HR, if you will. Thanks for that intro, Meredith.
Of course. To give everyone a quick run through of our webinar platform here. On the right, I see a couple of people have already gotten used to our chat box. That's awesome. We have our chat box where you can throw in any questions you have throughout the webinar. I will be sure to tag those questions, and we'll have a live Q&A with Woody at the very end. To get everyone used to it, I would love to hear where you're coming in from. Personally, I'm coming in from super sunny Chicago, where it is 30 degrees outside, and I think spring is 4 days away. So I'd love to hear where you're coming in from. We do have a couple poll questions throughout the webinar also. We have those will slide out just right on the bottom left of your screen. Again, it's just a really good way to interact with everybody. Oh my God, this is awesome. People coming in from St. Louis, Denver, nice Chicago. Rachel, I love it. Awesome. And then we do have a handout at the end. It's a really great SHRM article that highlights a lot of what we're going to talk about today and sums up some of those really great data points. And finally, if you are trying to get recertified in SHRM or HRCI, we are offering recertification credits. I will be sure to share those PDC IDs at the very end of the webinar, so be sure to stick around for that. And to give a little background on workforce.com, we are a workforce management software company who specializes in scheduling and time and attendance. And really, our overarching goal is just to help business leaders and frontline managers make the best decisions for their company. Great. Now that we got all the fun stuff out of the way, Jon, I would love to hear a little bit about your 18-year experience at General Mills as a director and 4 years as SVP of Kite Hill. You know, how did this experience lead you to consulting and the founding of Due Diligence?
Yeah, thanks for that. And I'll try to go through that briefly so we get to the meat of it, if you will. You know, at General Mills, like Meredith said, for 18 years, I directed 3 pretty significantly large sites. My last role there was I was director of continuous improvement for all of the North America sites. So got the opportunity to coach at all of the sites. Like Meredith had mentioned up front, got a great opportunity to co-lead a leadership academy really focused on frontline operations leaders. My partner in that, we got to meet Jon Woodrow, and a former UCLA coach, and we spent some time with him, understanding his leadership style and approach. We spent time at Nellis Air Force Base, understanding like after action reviews. And we really took all of that and built a model focused on an overused term at times, but servant leadership and building your own development plan and change management and those type of things. So it was really deep in this topic around how do you empower and engage your teams. From there, kind of got caught up in some of the, needing to transition, and Kite Hill that I moved to is a plant-based company, and I really fell in love with what they stood for. I wanted to get into this space of a startup. So I also have this background of large CPG, small startup. I wanted to work for a company that was moving at an extremely fast pace and flexible. And oh my gosh, I learned so much. I flexed so many muscles that I didn't know I had in terms of moving fast. And just recently, as Meredith mentioned, I started Due Diligence, my own LLC, and really driven by the encouragement of many peers that were like, what do you need to do this? You need to get into this operations consulting. And it's, really taking a caring approach to operations management and leveraging my food experience and trying to solve problems through engagement. So that's kind of how I got to where I'm at.
I love it. And we'll talk a little bit more about this model that you have created with your peers a little more down the line. I think it's really interesting to highlight, that intersection between operations and HR. And I think the jurisdiction between the two positions can get a little messy. So we'll go into that definitely a little bit more. I would love for you to tell me a little bit more specifically about the experience in HR and how it's influenced your work within the operations management side of things.
Yeah. As Meredith mentioned, my degree is in accounting. So if I would look back in time and go, wow, I'm going to be like deep into operations and continuous improvement when I started my career, there's no way that I would have ever thought about that path. But I got in when I was in accounting. Somebody took a chance on me. Diane, remember it like it was yesterday, saw something in me that probably I didn't even see, and is a kind of a mantra I live by today. How can I help to bring something out in somebody they don't even see themselves? And it was because somebody took a chance on me. And she's like, I really like how you interact around people. You ever thought about being an HR manager? And I'm like, what? Like, that was not even on the radar.
You're like, this is so off the trail I was going on. Yeah.
I'm a bean counter. I'm doing financial P&Ls for a company.
Sure.
And take a chance. She was starting up a customer call center. And I'm like, yeah, I'll do that. That quickly led into an HR manager role in a really tough Teamsters environment in a manufacturing site. And soon after, I fell in love with operations. I loved really the coaching side of the HR wheelhouse, if you will. In this particular site, we ended up when cellular manufacturing and teamwork were really kind of the buzz, if you will. We actually shut this facility down. We opened one up 20 miles away, working hand in hand with DDI, HR consultant, in doing the cellular manufacturing and targeted selection, interviewing. And actually all this work was highlighted in a book called Organizational Change That Works. And that just turned into my love for like coaching, getting feedback, responding to that feedback, giving feedback. And I'm like, I can do this in an operations role. And maybe like FMLA stuff and some of those things that I didn't have as much passion for, but the things I had passion for, I could do. So that's kind of how I got into these operations roles.
Right, where the roads cross a little bit, so to speak.
Yeah, yep.
I would love to start dipping our toes a little bit in the retention side of things. So you talked about having had been at a large CPG and then versus a smaller startup. I would love to hear what you found were the differences in terms of overall engagement and retention between frontline and manager staff.
Yeah, it's a great question. A couple of things maybe to start is like having kind of played in both worlds, if you will. It's very easy as, let's say, as a plant manager and as operations to go, this is HR's problem. Like they're not fixing it. They're not giving me what I need. And it's easy to having more of the HR to go like my team's not doing what I'm asking them to do. At the end of the day, we can't say this is somebody else's problem. It has to be a collective effort. HR partnering with whoever that is, whether you're leading a sales team, marketing team, operations team, whatever that is. So it has to be a partnership. And then what I hope to give you today is some probably pretty simplistic approach to what I believe looks like a complex problem. Most, in my mind, living in that CI world, most complex problems are solved with some pretty simple approaches, or at least starting there. So we have to decide like this is a way of life at work, the approach we take. So to the core of the question here is some of the large differences I saw, because there were definitely some similarities. In a large CPG, the career path is clearer defined. There's a director role, there's a VP role, a team leader becomes a production manager, a marketing, an associate marketing manager becomes a marketing manager, all those things. Those paths are clearly defined, which is why sometimes somebody comes to an organization because it's clearly defined. In a small startup, it's kind of nebulous. There was a question we got regarding this, Meredith, and we'll probably get into it later, but it's like, where do I go? There's only, I'm wearing so many hats, but you can get there. You just have to be a little more creative. So there are differences there. The importance of mission clarity, like what's the role of the organization, and therefore how does the individual role fit into that? And again, important in both sides. And I've seen gaps, whether it's large CPG or small company. Then probably where the differences lie, and to get to the same outcome, but maybe via different path, are the tools that we use, large CPG, let's say small startup, to get there. But those tools, there are similarities. For example, how often are you checking in with your individual team members? You've got to let a month go by before you check in, have a super engaging conversation, or is it something that's happened weekly? My personal preference was every single week with every direct report, I had a one-on-one, whether they were working remotely or we were in the same location. I wanted to see them. I wanted to hear about what they're working on. And back to the servant leadership, I wanted to understand what my role was in removing barriers. And it was all about building relationship. So whether it's large CPG or smaller company, my fundamental belief is as a manager of people, you have to build a strong relationship with your team if you hope to retain and engage them.
Sure. And why is it that managers are often the left holding the bag? Why are they considered the forgotten ones at the end of the day with this specific middleman cohort?
Yeah. I think why they're left holding the bag is usually that middle manager has responsibility for a larger amount of the people, if you will. Right. And so but part of the problem is if a manager is not engaged, what's the likelihood that the people that are working for them are engaged? Probably not very likely. Right.
Sure.
So I think that's the reason why we put this on that middle manager, if you will, is because they're usually owning a larger part of the organization people wise.
I would love to go more into pulling up this slide right here. Why is it that, some managers become disengaged? Speaking to these 5 points, I would love to hear your perspective.
Yeah. So Meredith gave me the opportunity to look at this slide before, and I like where this is going. So when you look at this on the surface, so reason a manager feels disengaged. I've got stuff going on in my personal life, and I'm gonna editorialize here this a little bit. I've got problems going on in my personal life, and nobody knows what I'm going through.
Mm-hmm.
There's a disagreement regarding my career path, i.e., my manager's not aligned with me on what my next steps are. That may be that I think I should be moving faster than what I'm moving, or my manager hasn't clearly articulated what that next step is and when it might be happening. Third, I'm unhappy with the progress. Just kind of to build on what I just said is like, I'm not moving fast enough. I'm looking at my peers. They're moving faster. We started at the same day. Meredith and I started the same day, and she's already a director. I'm here. Why am I not there?
Mm-hmm.
Complacent within the role. My manager doesn't meet with me often. I haven't been given anything new and exciting. And then lastly is we never have a conversation about development. I've offered up some training opportunities that I'd like to attend, but I just hear that we don't have any money, et cetera, et cetera. All of these, if you hear my theme, to me, boil back to this employee's manager. My manager doesn't know what's going on in my life. My manager hasn't engaged with me regarding my career path. We haven't worked on this together. So circle back to how often am I meeting with somebody? And we can all say, like, we don't have time to do this. I've got what do you don't understand? I have so many pressures. I've had those same pressures. I've sat on boards. I've been a team leader on a third shift in a manufacturing site and everything in the middle. I understand the pressures, but one fundamental is I was always going to build a relationship with my team because I never wanted a team member to be leaving me.
Mm.
If you get this happened to me early on in my career, you get a resignation letter and it's out of the blue. Whose fault is it? I early on had to decide, like, that's my fault. Like, I'm taking that personal. How is it that somebody plopped a resignation letter on my desk and I had no clue that it was coming? That fundamentally, that day, changed my approach in the future of how I would build relationships and why I would. I didn't want somebody to be leaving me.
Right. I mean, that age-old statement is people leave their managers at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And especially when you're an upper manager, when you're, more higher up the ladder, closer to C-suite, let's say, if that even pertains within your business, sometimes they're so small that they don't even have that. But if you're all the way up there and you're looking down and seeing your frontline managers and seeing that a lot of their staff are leaving them, that's a conversation that needs to be had with, okay, we're looking at the numbers here and what's going on. Like, what are we checking in with them? Because you talked about how there doesn't seem to be enough time for the one-on-one meetings. There is all these issues going on. But at the end of the day, that's all problems that are going to be paperwork for, okay, we got to go out and hire more. We got to backfill these positions. So one way or another, it's going to come up and sneak up on you.
Monica hit it dead on in the chat. If you don't have time now, you're going to find time looking for the replacement and going through the turn, et cetera. So it's like, would you rather spend the next, hour in a one-on-one weekly, or a month later, 10 different hours doing interviews to replace the person you could have spent an hour with every week?
Totally.
And build that relationship. This will be a tool in action I'll give you at the end, but I'm going to weave these in, hopefully, in our combo today. One is, as you build that conversation, the relationship, and again, just fundamentally having weeklies, bi-weeklies. And I think this is where HR can help managers, is if you don't feel comfortable, like, how do I start to build that relationship? How do I have an engaging relationship? HR team should be helping to provide tools, or even a little role playing, like role play how I might have an engaging conversation, right? Um, Build that relationship to such a place where you could ask your employee on a 1 to 10 scale. If I'm asking Meredith, we've sat down, we've had these conversations about our career, and I go, Meredith, we talked about a lot about your career and development, and we, assuming we know each other well, tell me on a 1 to 10 scale. 1, your resume's done and you actually got a job offer in hand and you're ready to put that resignation letter on me, to 10 is, this is the best job I've ever had. I would never consider leaving. I'm so engaged. I appreciate you as a manager. Where are you at? 1 to 10. Like, ask your team members that answer. And if you don't believe they're going to be honest and open with you, then you haven't built the relationship, in my opinion, deep enough in order for that to happen. And hopefully I'll be able to give some examples where that simple number unlocked so many conversations. When somebody goes, I'm actually a 5, Woody, today. Like,
Yeah.
Why is that? Where are you at? Tell me about your headspace. What's, where do you feel your needs aren't being met? Where am I not meeting your needs? But that 1 to 10 scale, it's pretty simple, could unlock so many things.
And I think, what we have on this slide is a really perfect reference point to say, if somebody comes back with a 5, let's say, you can point to these reasons, these 5 reasons, and say, okay, let's narrow it down even more. Like, let's go into, is it something going on in your private life? Is it a disagreement regarding your career path? Like, what are we talking about here? And being able to dissect that further and further down until you get to the root of the issue already gives you so many brownie points as a manager. And, you can convey that to your frontline staff, frontline managers, to hopefully follow a similar model.
Yeah.
I love what people were saying in the Q&A, on the poll question. I asked, how much of a priority is engagement and retention within your organization? And 50%, exactly 50%, 53%, engagement and retention are a top priority. And then I thought it was interesting. A couple of people said engagement and retention is not a priority at all. So, Jon, my question for you here is, why is that? Why are managers overlooked when it comes to discussions, specifically within upper managers, C-suite execs, surrounding engagement in the workplace, and as a result, don't necessarily get the resources they need to become re-engaged or, reignite that engagement?
My opinion is that people are seeing this as an initiative instead of a way to go about work. So again, back to this, building a relationship with my team, taking the time to have a one-on-one and go deep, and just have that be the way you lead, the way you manage, instead of, we have a retention issue. Let's go do a climate survey. And not that climate surveys are bad, but a climate survey, in my opinion, is not going to get to the root of why one person is not feeling engaged in an organization, right? And so C-suite level, again, having been on an executive team that reports to a board of directors, and we'd have these conversations, my reflection would be with our leadership team, how well are we individually engaging with our teams? And the systemic issue begins with the individual issue and the one-on-one relationship, the one-on-one conversations. Maybe tied to this, Meredith, a little bit to the previous topic. When me and my partner were doing this leadership academy at General Mills, this was one of those like just aha moments that will tie back to this. Where we did this at General Mills, there was a manufacturing site. So we were usually doing this training with like 30 to 40 brand new team leaders, or at least new to General Mills, if you will. And we take them to a production site, and we'd have a panel of operators and mechanics. And I remember asking a mechanic in one of these first panels we did, how do you know whether you have a good team leader or not? How do you know you have a good manager? This person said, I know in the first 10 seconds. I'm like, first 10
Wow.
seconds? Like, wow. Like, tell me more. I know in the first 10 seconds, are they more interested in me? Are they more interested in telling me about themselves? And I know in the first
Interesting.
10 seconds, if they start telling me about their background, their resume, their accomplishments, and all they've done,
Sure.
the person was like, I don't think we're going to have a shot. And that just like totally changed. That was mind blowing, but like I get it.
Right.
Totally changed my approach of like, especially even when I meet somebody new or in all the different roles that I had when I first went into an organization, a site, whatever it was, it's like, I need to do a much better job of learning about everybody, every team member. They really don't care as much about me. And that's going to help. That's going to drive the engagement. First off, I want to do that because that's just how I'm wired. But in order to connect people, engage people, empower people, retain people, get to know them. They've got a story.
And I think, you talked about how that's how you're wired, but I think a lot of that feeds into your background in HR and the training that you've done there.
Yeah.
And I mean, to me, and this is just another little tangent, I guess, but to me, having that training, even if it's a couple courses that you're taking as an operation manager or general manager, director, having some background in HR is so important to me. Even just doing some online SHRM type courses, anything like that, I think is so crucial for any good manager to have in their back pocket.
It's a great point to build on that. Some of the best training I've ever had, as hard as it was early on, was to do role playing, to get to walk through with somebody. Let's say, Meredith, you are my manager, and I've got to go have a convo with a manager on my team about development, and I think it's going to be difficult, or I'm going to do a performance appraisal that I think is going to be challenging, to come to you and be vulnerable and like, hey, HR, will you help role play me and give me some tools in case I get some tough questions that I can't answer? And I won't be in there going, well, it was my manager that told me to come in here and say these things or whatever. It's like, you're right, have an ownership of it. You're going to walk away with way more credibility by owning it and being equipped going into that conversation. Those aren't easy. Nobody kind of likes doing that, or maybe showing they're vulnerable and like not as equipped as you want everyone else to think that you are. But that's where ops can partner with HR and just providing some of that fundamental coaching if you don't feel equipped.
I mean, we can go on like a whole other webinar on just training within HR. I think that's brilliant. It really is. I want to move forward though to the cost of disengaged managers and some of the financial challenges that are surrounding that. So looking at, I know there's a lot to look at here. A couple of these quotes I wanted to point out. There's a really interesting Gallup report on cutting the cost of disengaged restaurant general managers. So in the hourly workspace, this bottom quote here I found really interesting. And just to read it out for those who are dialing in on their phones, a recent Gallup meta-analysis shows that teams in their top quartile of engagement shows 41% lower absenteeism, 24% less turnover in high turnover organizations like restaurants, 28% less shrinkage, 70% fewer safety incidents, very important, especially in the manufacturing industry, 40% fewer product quality deficits, 10% higher customer ratings, 70% higher productivity, 20% higher sales, and 21% higher profitability compared to those on the bottom teams. I think that like sums it up perfectly. And I would love to hear, what your thoughts are behind some of those quote unquote hidden expenses. And even kind of looking at the bolded quote on the top left, talking about the average cost of turnover per general manager for restaurants is almost $14,000.
Yeah. When I look at this, actually, I hadn't thought about this before, but as you're talking, Meredith, what came to my mind was in regards to like restaurant was the TV show Bar Rescue.
Oh, yeah. Oh
Yeah.
my
So
God. Yeah.
if those don't know, real quick, John Tapper goes in,
Uh-huh.
like usually the bar is a train wreck. And
Sure.
usually at the end of the day, it's the leader, it's the
Oh,
owner, it's the manager. And if you've seen that show, think about how the bartender responds in those environments, how the waitresses and waiters respond in that environment. They don't care most of the time. Like
right.
fundamentally, they care. I don't mean it that way. Like they care. They want to do a good job, but because maybe the leader's drinking behind the bar, doesn't
Hmm.
care, is letting people in the organization get away with things. They don't feel there's accountability. That just trickles down. And guess what's happening? A bartender doesn't really care of the mix, the ratio of alcohol versus cocktail they're putting in, and they're giving money away. They really don't care if, like, as much, because it's like my manager doesn't care. You're not getting repeat business, right?
Right.
That same thing happens whether it's restaurant or not. So to build on this, a couple of things I thought of was, just as in the restaurant in that example, is I've seen the level of detail orientation go down as people are not as engaged and retained. They lose sight of the details. And
Hmm.
what does that lead to? In my career, that's led to major project management issues. There was a blind spot that could have been seen that now has caused delays in a product launch or a large capital project because, again, somebody wasn't engaged. Or I think about when I've seen it in my past, a disengaged sales manager and how well they're representing the brand to a customer. They're just not all in, versus compare the person that's super loyal. You've given them all kind of kudos on the job they've done. They're feeling good about their career path. They want to go get the next sell. They're in on the brand, and so forth. So you lose sales. Um,
Totally.
you lose cost in a project, delays of servicing, all of those things.
What is specifically the top-down discourse? So we're talking again, C-suite executives, the top-down discourse between or of disengaged managers in this case.
Yeah. Uh, Tell me if I answer this, but
Mhm.
I feel like the manager, let's say the person that's feeling unengaged, they don't feel respected. The manager isn't going deep, or the the employee is feeling like they're not going deep with me. I'm throwing out cues of why I'm not happy, but my manager isn't picking up on them. My manager isn't connected to me. So I believe that discourse, again, is a lack of connection.
Mhm. And how does it impact, specifically frontline staff, those who are working below these managers, and even directors and upper management?
I can better give like examples in a manufacturing site, um, how sometimes people are, for those that have worked in manufacturing sites, um, operators, mechanics, not trying to overgeneralize, but they're usually really candid. They're going to
Mhm.
tell you what's on their mind and will quickly tell you of a disengaged manager. And they won't use those words, but I never see my manager around.
Okay.
Um, I'm asking for help. I have something I need and I'm not getting an answer, or I get an answer to talk to somebody else. So to me, that's how that middle manager is impacted. And usually, again, that's coming down to them. They don't feel engaged, and that's rolling to, like, I'm not going to spend time on the floor in this case. I'm not going
Right.
to do some other things. My manager doesn't care about me. I'm instead in my office building my resume and looking at jobs on LinkedIn.
Right. Right. Easy apply, easy apply,
Yeah.
easy apply. Yeah. I think it's interesting. You gave the example of that reality TV show. I'm totally blanking on
Bar Rescue.
Yes, exactly. And you talked about how, there's kind of a slackness when it comes to the managers are literally slacking off. They're not really paying attention. They don't really care. They're not loyal to the company, and they're not loyal to the mission or goal of the business. And I think that is exactly what people are saying in the poll question that I sent out. I asked, how have you found disengaged managers to impact frontline teams as well as upper managers? And somebody said they follow the leader. Like, at the end of the day, everybody's just going to follow suit. And of course, that's going to have a huge impact on the ROI of the business, of the ultimate success of the business. Because at the end of the day, as you said, what a successful business is repeat customers and repeat loyalty. And I think that is so important to highlight, because without that loyalty, starting from the middleman, starting from those managers who are working the front lines, there's nobody to follow suit.
Yeah.
There's nobody to lead by example.
Think about it, Meredith, something that resonates to what you're speaking to. Think about your manager and the people in their personal life, partner, spouse, whoever. Before you physically meet them, they will have met you, because we are all dinner table conversation.
Right.
And what I would tell the teams that I worked with is that were leading others is, this is not a likability scale. This is not like, well, I just need to build a relationship with my team members so they like me and I'm going to give them everything they want. No, this is a respect scale, removing barriers, building a relationship. So when your employee is talking about you, their leader, at the dinner table, it's a good conversation. And so when the first time they actually meet you, it's I've heard so much about you. Thank you for, all you've done with Meredith and working with her, et cetera. Or is it, oh, I've met you. Like, we haven't met, but I've heard about you.
Right.
Oh, gosh.
I'd be shaking if somebody said, I've heard about you. I'd be like, oh, God.
Yeah, if you just have that lens of like, when I'm having a conversation with my team, this is going home. This is going to be at the dinner table. How's this going to play out? For sure. I just wanted to quickly highlight, Lori, you asked a really great question. I highlighted it in the Q&A. We'll be sure to get around to that. I wanted to ask you, Jon, what do you look for when you see or detect a disengaged manager? We kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'd love to go more into the details here. Yeah, I look for less initiative. Somebody, and there are some people that just, like the way they're wired, they just don't take a lot of initiative, but you tend to see less initiative, especially from people like you're accustomed to seeing it. Some of the things like, absences, unexplained absences, especially in the remote world. I've had people on my teams that are working in a remote environment, and they're not as connected. They're not as quick to respond to some things. Kidding, maybe not kidding aside, go check out LinkedIn. Do they say they're available? Yeah. I'm available. They got the little like open for work hashtag on there. Right. Tend to hear more complaints versus solutions. And then doing the minimum of what is asked. I'm doing exactly what you asked. I'm not kind of going above and beyond. Those to me are some of the signs. I think another really great sign is, when anybody starts a job, whether it's a part-time job at McDonald's or something more managerial, director level, there's a certain amount of enthusiasm that somebody has when they enter a job. And if you watch that decline to the point that they're not really, you're catching up with them, hopefully you're doing your one-on-ones, and they're not super excited about, asking the questions of, okay, where do you see this going? Where do you see this job of mine progressing, and, just having that career path laid out for them? When they stop asking those questions, I think that's a really good sign that they're not interested in the company. They're not interested in being loyal to the goals or mission statements of the organization itself. And I think that's something really important to look out for. And again, those one-on-ones are really crucial to tap into that and to say,
Okay, they didn't really have that many questions. They were not engaged simply in the one-on-ones. They're not going to be engaged when they're working out in the, on the floor. And I think having those conversations, both with your managers and your frontline staff, is so important. And it actually feeds in perfectly with this slide. We got this graph from Lattice, a really great report from them, the State of the People Strategy report from 2023. And they talked a lot about identifying those career growth paths available and how, much of that drastic change of when it's growth paths exist and employees understand them, how much it exceeds their goals and, how they are loyal to the company at the end of the day. Kind of a similar question surrounding it is, I think there's an issue of overstepping when it comes to talking about future and, personal life. So, Jon, my question for you is, how can HR intervene without necessarily crossing a professional boundary here?
Some organizations have something maybe like a 9-block probably process. And for those that aren't familiar, it's like what's how's somebody currently performing to what is their upper potential. And 9-block might be in 1 block it's they're underperforming, or they're not in the right role. To the far end of the block is, wow, we see this person like moving multiple steps in a career path, and they're more than exceeding currently where they're at. That doesn't have to be a formalized process. And I think this is where HR and the rest of the organization can come together in maybe even developing something that's not formal, or doing that on a one-on-one basis. Sit down with your HR team and say, hey, I've got an employee. We've got a disengagement issue. I really think they're performing. The career path isn't clear. Let's develop a path together on how we can get them to a goal, if you will. And that, just like when I look at this graph, that's just kind of screaming out to me. Either the path doesn't exist, and if the path doesn't exist and you don't know what it is as a manager, well, sure enough, the employee doesn't know what it is.
Sure.
Work with your HR team to figure that out. Or it exists and I'm not getting the feedback as an employee to even understand, like, where do I fit in this? What does my manager really think about me? For me, whenever I know some comments came up about performance reviews, for me, doing a performance review, I never, and I mean never, wanted there to be a surprise in a performance review. I was never, and I rarely use that word, but I was never going to give feedback in a performance review that I had not given during the year. And again, back to this, have to build a relationship and have to be giving feedback in an environment where that feedback goes back and forth. And I'll tell you, somebody will be engaged and you'll have better conversations on that career path, even if you are in a small organization.
Yeah.
That's kind of nebulous.
No surprises.
No,
they should have a certain sense of what's coming. They shouldn't be head over the head.
Does anybody want a surprise in a performance review? No, I don't.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's like PTSD from pop quizzes back.
Yeah. I mean, at times you have to lead up too. I can think of managers in my path where I'm leading up and I'm waiting for my manager to have the conversation with me about development. Yep. I'm not waiting, because 2 years from now, if I'm in the same role and my manager's never had a conversation with me, guess whose fault that is? I looked at that. That's my fault, because I'm going to be sitting in the same job doing the same thing 2 years later. Like, I need to push it. I need to make it happen. I need to lead up on this case. Yeah.
So what can upper managers do to get ahead of this issue and in the end just prevent turnover from happening?
Yeah. Maybe to think about a couple of tools, if you will, or a couple of kind of nuggets to leave you with, and we can get into maybe some of these questions. Is first, build this relationship weekly, bi-weekly, and just don't go through the motions. Like, make sure you're at a place where you're digging into, like, what's motivating somebody, why they like a certain project. Ask questions, like really approach this. This is going to sound maybe a little too cheesy, but like from a caring and love approach, like that. Again, that's how I'm wired. Like I care about my team. And in order for there to be engagement, back to this 10-second, like I better show them caring.
Yeah.
If I'm expecting them to care for their employees. So build that relationship. Something I hadn't mentioned before is in your one-on-ones, turn this back on yourself. Do a little start, stop, continue.
I love that.
Start, stop, continue. Meredith, what is it that I'm doing that you want me to continue doing? What is it that I'm doing you'd like me to stop doing? Are there things I'm doing you want me to start doing?
Yeah.
By allowing your employee to start giving you feedback, hopefully, not everybody, but hopefully they will be more open to being receptive to you giving feedback. It's just I'm telling you, start, stop, continue all my life.
Yeah.
It's opened up so many conversations. So that's one. You have to explain the importance of the role. How does role clarity, how does their role fit into the larger organization? The 1 to 10 scale that I mentioned before, build a meaningful development plan. This is where HR can help out.
Okay.
To me, a meaningful development plan is as simple as this. Maybe HR helps with like a formalized, form, if you will, but it can be as simple as start with what motivates me. There are things people are working on outside of work that motivate them. What is it about that? Somebody's a little league coach. Somebody's a coach of their son, daughter's AAU basketball team. They coach band. They're a leader in some organization. What is it about that? Why do you like doing that? Those things play out at work. So what motivates you? Align on strengths and opportunities, and then develop a couple action plans. One against the strength, a couple against the opportunities. HR could help to build something like that.
Sure.
And then maybe a couple, one really small and simple one, two that are kind of tied together. If you haven't written a personal note to a team member, do that. Thanking them for what they've done. I have letters that leaders have written to me, and I can think of letters I've written that 20 years later, I still have it and they still have it. It made a super impact to me. And with that, take the opportunity, HR managers, to highlight what somebody is doing within the organization. They've catch somebody doing something well. If they've done something well, highlight that to others. Broadcast that.
Yeah.
An email copying them to your manager on what they've done. I'll guarantee you over time that is going to engage them.
I love that. I think there seems to be a little ambiguity about the jurisdiction of each of these roles and, where they come into play, where one maybe sidelines a little bit and lets the other one take over. So what can you tell me about more or less jurisdiction between, let's say, even the CHRO and the COO?
Yeah. First, everybody has to see this as their own responsibility in engagement, right? So then the way I see the jurisdiction is, irregardless COO, head of HR, is we have to work together. And you have people reporting to you, and you have to develop that leadership, that career path. The manager is responsible for the development, the nurturing. HR, in my opinion, is responsible for providing the tools and equipping the manager to have successful conversations and equipping them to navigate the career path. But HR is not responsible for building the relationship, for engaging the employee in conversations,
Yeah.
for having one-on-ones, for writing that letter, for asking 1 to 10 scale.
Mhm.
HR is not responsible for that. We as leaders of people, that's what we own.
I think that's so important to highlight, truly. At the end of the day, like, I think there seems to be a lot of this pointing of fingers as to whose issue engagement and retention is at the end of the day. And working together, like, it sounds like, as you said, cheesy, but like, it is so prominent for the success of the business and the success
Yeah,
of actually retaining those employees, which just it helps the ROI. It's going to help the profitability. It's going to
yeah.
actually make the company profitable and successful. So I think that's so important. A follow-up question, actually, that I was just thinking about: how often should HR managers and directors of operations, whatever those upper managers in the operations field, how often should they be meeting themselves? We talk a lot about there's one-on-one between the managers and upper managers. What about HR and ops? How often should they be communicating this issue?
Um, Probably depending on the issue. It's like if in an individual case you have a high potential employee who
Mm,
you believe is a retention risk, you should be meeting every couple of weeks to talk about. HR should be asking how the one-on-ones are going
sure.
and what the employee is saying, and HR should be asking, what tools do you need? Is there training? Is it like clear? Would you like me to have a joint conversation to build on? The reason this is, or the reason this needs to be a partnership is, as a manager, I always wanted, again, having worn both hats, I wanted HR to build on the conversation I was already having,
Mhm.
not to go in and say like different things. And I think that's at times where HRs might be a little gun shy of like, how do I insert myself?
Yeah.
I have to, as a manager, come to HR and go, it's okay for you to engage.
Right.
Here's how I'd like you to engage basis what I've already said. So like that has to happen pretty frequently with a high potential, high risk um, departure person. I would say on a quarterly basis, you should be sitting down with HR talking about your staff and just do your own 1 to 10 scale assessment.
Yeah.
Walk with HR and go, hey, I think Bob's a 1. I think Jennifer's a 6.
Mhm.
What are we doing about it?
Yeah. I think that's such a good point. At the end of the day, how can HR and operations, both of them together, help managers re-engage with their teams? This is a big, very loaded question, but I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. I'm glad you're asking this now, and I'm just gonna echo some of those things that
Mhm.
I talked about, which is again, build that relationship, start, stop, continue, open yourself up to feedback, um, role clarity, explain the importance of the person's role within the organization. If they've got 25 priorities right now, it's going to be hard for them to understand
Yeah.
how their role fits in the organization. And therefore, which of these 25 are really going to get me to the next level?
Yeah.
What are they going to get me to the next one? You helping to clarify. You go knock these 2 out of the park. Like that's putting you up. That's putting you on this path. And I know I'm making it sound super simple, but it goes back to that first thing and willing to have a conversation with somebody. I'm going to tangent a little bit.
Mhm.
I think of a team member I had working in California, and their family was in Wisconsin. And the 1 to 10 question isn't something I'm asking every week. It might be a quarterly question. It might be every couple of months. And I was asking her the question, where are you at? She's like, I'm a 6. I'm like, we've dropped from the last time. Tell me a little bit more. She's like, me and my husband, me and Benjamin, were having a conversation, and we'd really like to get back to Wisconsin. And Woody, to be honest, I've actually started looking at a couple of things in the Chicago area, and I'm like,
Mm.
let's talk more. And at the end of the day, maybe it's not that the company we're with is the best fit, but I'm going to
Yeah.
try to find that way to make it happen. And long story short, what ended up happening, we managed her role in such a way, brought out strengths that allowed her to work remotely in Wisconsin. It was a
Mm.
game changer. She was a 10 every other time I asked her. There was loyalty that went
Wow.
way beyond because of the willingness to work. And it all started with that 1 to 10 question. And it just actually, her husband, I remember one remote call, and he kind of mentions, and he's like, I can't believe you're having this type of conversation with your manager, like,
Right.
about like looking and stuff like that. I'm like, if we don't have it,
Uh-huh.
unfortunately, you're having it with somebody I don't know, and you're going to go work for them. I'd rather you have it with
Exactly.
me, right? So that 1 to 10 scale, build HR to help build that meaning development plan. What about motivates me? Strengths and opportunities, actions. Write a letter, write a
Yeah.
nice thank you note, and highlight their work.
I think it's so true. And I do agree. A lot of the reasons behind somebody becoming disengaged or not being maybe as engaged as they once were is circumstantial. It's not necessarily personal to you as an upper manager or to you as a director or to the company as a whole. Maybe your example, maybe they're moving away or, their partner got a job somewhere else, whatever it might be. I think a lot of it does just come down to communicating. And if you can have those conversations, they're not going to necessarily want to leave just because of some smaller circumstance that might be going on in their life. And
Yeah.
that's the differentiating factor between needing to put a lot more time and money and effort into backfilling that employee that probably would have stayed on from one-on-one
Yeah.
at the end of the day. I think that's so awesome. I would love to close out with a couple of questions. We have a few live audience members that did drop in some questions. Steven, at the very beginning, he asked, you mention Leadership Academy? I would love to hear a little bit more about that. And, if you can embellish a little more on what you've done there.
Yeah. So this was a leadership academy that me and another team member actually built. That we did within General Mills. So if somebody was interested of just like a few nuggets out of that, topics were ethics, integrity, change management, servant leadership, mission clarity, some of those things is really what we did. Basically a full week of that. We did role playing and giving feedback, receiving feedback. We actually I led a session on building your own development plan. How do you build a development plan when your manager is not building it for you?
That's amazing.
So that was that Leadership Academy.
Yeah. That's amazing. Lori has been a complete rock star throughout. Lori, thank you so much for all your comments. She asked an amazing question. She said, frontline managers and supervisors know when their managers are disengaged. How do we make it safe for them to let upper management know?
Yeah, that's a great question. A little bit depending upon the scenario. So there's probably can HR play a role? Let's say we've got a supervisor and they believe that their manager, the supervisor's disengaged because the manager's disengaged, and the supervisor wants to let the manager know. I think there is a place here where like HR can help the manager in like asking some questions. This would tell me there's not a relationship built where the supervisor believes they could give open and honest feedback, right? Like, oh, my career might get halted if I give this feedback. It's not a safe environment, whatever that is. I think HR can play a role with the supervisor in equipping them with maybe some questions to ask their manager to help with that engagement. Equally, HR can help in the manager that is not engaging with the supervisor to maybe give them some tea leaves of, hey, I'm not calling any one person out, but you may want to talk to your team, equip them with a couple of questions to ask, which might be a 1 to 10 scale question. Hey, as you do your one-on-ones this week, and the folks, ask 1 to 10, kind of where they're at. See what happens, and come back to me, and let's work through that together.
I love that. I love it. I think bringing it back to that 1 to 10 is such a consistent concept to have throughout the entire organization that everyone can relate to. It's very simple. We have a couple of emailed questions I would love to get to. They're super insightful. So we have a question from a Gerald I. As an ops manager, I tend to standardize every business procedure we have to avoid variability. My fear is that by creating such a predictable, monotonous job for our managers, that they will be unfulfilled by their day-to-days. How can I combat this while also remaining predictable when it comes to the ROI and labor costs? If this question doesn't summarize the, debacle between every ops manager and what they have going on in their lives, I don't know what does.
Yeah. I go back to this talking to your employees around what their strengths and their opportunities are, and then what actions could come out of that. So I'm a process rigor person, continuous improvement in my world. I want to know whether we're winning or losing every day.
For
So
sure.
I'm with you. I love process rigor, but when it comes to people, it's really hard we have to operate a little more in the gray, if you will, right?
Yep.
So when it comes to people, I have to individually understand Meredith in the job she's doing. She's got business processes to follow. What makes her tick? What are your strengths? What do you really enjoy doing? Okay, and what you enjoy doing, how do we do more of that? And it might not be in the current role, but again, you're going to get somebody way more engaged if you're tapping into what they enjoy doing. And while you're still following business processes and delivering ROI.
100%. That's amazing. We have an awesome question from Chloe S. As the HR manager for a small manufacturing company, it's hard to lay out a clear career path as we're not very established and working on just growing the team. How can I promote loyalty without much career path clarity to offer?
Chloe, I just lived this for the last 4.5 years. There was
All
no
too
career
relatable.
path. We got creative with titles.
Yep.
All of those things. I can think of a team member that just love her approach, and she had strength in so many different disciplines. And that's how we approached her career path. Usually in a small company or even a startup, people are wearing so many hats. And I take that as a good thing. The downside to that is they're probably only good at everything and not excellent at a few. So what is it they could be excellent at that they enjoy doing that's a need in the company and is going to have a meaningful impact to leadership team and board? And so what I loved about, being in a small company, I was working for the CEO and my team's an engineer on the floor is doing something great. That was a quick email note to the CEO of that's what this person's doing. And guess what? Wasn't on their job description, but it was a need the company had. Awesome that they did that. So I think there's a great opportunity to look across in a small company what the needs of the company are and match those up with what somebody enjoys, desires to do.
100%. And even if titles aren't necessarily set in stone, there's a sense of identity that it comes with when somebody is bestowed an, upper manager type of title, GM, so to speak. And I think there's a sense of worth and, again, empowering that sense of loyalty for the company. And it goes a long way. And I know that might sound, a little fishy at the end of the day to say, we're just going to give them a title. But it really does help their sense of place within the company. Yeah. It really does.
Give a title and give responsibility.
Yes.
Don't just give the title, because then I would see that as like, well, my role didn't change. I thought responsibility is more accountability, right?
Right.
That they will appreciate that. I think of somebody I had working on my team. Their background was quality, and they became like a startup manager in ops because that was the need. And they learned so much from that. And then that turned into data their love for data from quality and filling
Uh-huh.
a data need that we had, and a marketing person who led commercialization process and wanting to lead a capital project because they had that, they just love for leading projects. You lead a marketing project in terms of like product deadlines,
Mhm.
your key lines, your ingredient deck, etc. Well, just call those something else in a capital project and just lead in the team. You don't necessarily need to be the technical expert
Yeah.
to herd everybody together in meeting milestones.
Yeah.
And that person grew from that opportunity, and we filled the gap.
Amazing. I love that. I don't want to take up any more of your time, but thank you so much, John, for coming on. I know I learned a lot. I'm sure our audience did too. I mean, just looking at the comments box, people are loving it. So thank you so, so much for coming on. Again, we'll have to do an entire part 2 on just giving some HR training to our operations friends. And yeah, we'll have to have you back on because that was spectacular. Thank you so much for coming.
Hey, the pleasure was mine. I'd love to be a part of part 2 if
Yeah.
folks are open for it. If they got, my hope is today you walk away with even 1 or 2 nuggets. Think about what we started with. This is a very complex problem on the surface, but there's some simplistic things we can each do to drive engagement.
100%.